Commander Vireya of the Zev'Quari Dominion stood at the edge of the landing platform, her sapphire blue skin gleaming under Earth's golden sun. Her sharp, angular features were etched with practiced stoicism, her silver-white hair braided tightly along the ridges of her crown. A gust of wind carried the unfamiliar scents of this world, salt from the ocean, the subtle spice of plant life, the lingering traces of human-made technology. She remained still, her black and crimson armor a stark contrast to the pale concrete beneath her boots. Around her, Zev'Quari soldiers moved with precision, their postures disciplined, their sharp yellow eyes scanning the perimeter with an ingrained wariness. They were warriors, elite among the stars, and their presence on Earth was not one of conquest but of observation, an initiative to assess the true potential of the human race. Vireya had expected this mission to be routine, another assignment, another planet to study, another race to evaluate. She had not expected her entire world to shatter in an instant. The moment her boot touched Earth's soil, a searing heat flared to life on her wrist. Her entire body tensed as white-hot energy raced through her veins, a pulse of raw, undeniable power that sent a jolt through her very soul. A glowing sigil burned into her wrist, golden markings shifting like liquid stardust against her deep blue skin. Her soulmate indicator. No, that was impossible. Vireya had been raised to believe that a Zev'Quari's soulmate was a rarity, an almost mythical bond formed only in the presence of one's destined partner. And yet, as she stood on this alien world, among a species her people barely considered worthy of intergalactic alliances, her own body betrayed her. A sharp intake of breath was her only outward reaction, but inside, chaos erupted. This had to be a mistake, a malfunction. Perhaps Earth's atmosphere was interfering with her physiology. Yes, that had to be it. But then she felt it. The pull. Her gaze snapped up, scanning the gathered humans before her. A line of Earth's officials stood, a few meters away, their expressions ranging from polite curiosity to thinly veiled apprehension. And among them, she saw him. A tall, human male stood slightly apart from the others, his stance more relaxed, yet not careless. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his dark eyes focused, unreadable. His deep brown hair was slightly tousled. By the wind, the sharp planes of his face marked with subtle traces of past battles, faint scars near his temple and jawline. Unlike the rigid formal postures of the others, his presence felt solid, rooted. The moment their eyes met, a deep hum reverberated through Vireya's chest. Her pulse thundered. The glowing sigil on her wrist pulsed in sync with her heart. It was him. This human, this mere mortal of a species barely out of its infancy, was the one fated to her. The world tilted beneath her feet. No, this could not be. Commander? One of her soldiers, Lieutenant Jarin, spoke softly in their native tongue, his tone laced with concern. He had noticed the flicker of hesitation, a rare moment of uncertainty from his leader. Vireya forced her emotions back into a locked vault, her face unreadable once more. She could not allow weakness to show, not now, not ever. She strode forward, ignoring the heat on her wrist, ignoring the way the human's gaze never wavered from hers. She was here for diplomacy, not fate. Yet, as she approached, she couldn't suppress the unsettling realization. Her entire world had just changed. Daelen watched as the alien commander approached, his years of military experience keeping his face neutral, his stance controlled. But something was off. The moment she had stepped onto Earth's surface, he had felt an odd sensation, a sudden pressure in his chest, like the air had thickened. And then, when their eyes met, something within him shifted. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. He had read the files on the Zev'Quari. They were an elite warrior race, their strength and intelligence unmatched among the many species that roamed the stars. The Dominion rarely sought alliances with weaker civilizations, which made this initiative a significant moment in human history. Yet, none of his training, none of his intelligence briefings, had prepared him for her. Commander Vireya. She was breathtaking in a way that had nothing to do with mere aesthetics. Her presence alone commanded attention. The way she moved, controlled, calculated, exuding an aura of power. Her sharp golden eyes seemed to pierce through every layer of deception, and, for a moment when she looked at him, he could have sworn something flickered in her expression. Shock, confusion, it was gone before he could decipher it. "Commander Vireya," he greeted, his voice steady as he extended a hand. "Welcome to Earth." For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then, as if steeling herself, she clasped his hand. The moment their skin touched, Daelen felt lightning shoot through him. It was fire and ice, a surge of something ancient, something primal. His breath caught, but he forced himself to maintain his composure. Vireya, however, tensed, so subtly that only someone with his level of training would have noticed. She released his hand a fraction too quickly. Her golden eyes locked onto his, assessing, calculating. Then, she inclined her head slightly. "Your people have shown great hospitality," she said, her voice smooth, controlled. Daelen's instincts screamed at him. Something was happening. Something he couldn't quite grasp. "Glad to hear it," he replied, masking his own unease. "We have much to discuss." Her eyes flickered to his wrist for the briefest second, so quick that he might have imagined it. But, as she stepped back, Daelen caught a glimpse of something glowing beneath the edge of her gauntlet. A pattern of golden light, shifting like liquid, and then, as quickly as it had appeared, she adjusted her sleeve, hiding it from view. Daelen had spent years decoding enemy strategies, analyzing weaknesses, detecting even the smallest of tells, and right now, Commander Vireya was hiding something. The rest of the introductions passed in a blur. Formalities, discussions of protocol, schedules for negotiations, all things Daelen usually had a firm grip on, but his mind remained elsewhere. His body still buzzed from that handshake, from that inexplicable connection. It made no logical sense. He didn't believe in fate or preordained destinies. Yet, something had happened in that moment. And if the tension in Vireya's posture was anything to go by, she had felt it too. As the human and Zev'Quari delegations made their way into the facility, Daelen walked alongside Vireya. "You seem distracted," he noted, keeping his tone casual. Her gaze remained forward. A warrior is always aware of their surroundings. "Aware," he echoed. "Or avoiding something?" For the first time she glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You are perceptive." "I have to be," he said. "It keeps me alive." A moment of silence stretched between them, tension thick as steel cables. Then she spoke, so softly that, for a moment, he thought he imagined it. This should not be possible. The words were cryptic, but the weight behind them was undeniable. Before he could press further, she turned away, her posture once again that of a composed warrior. "We should focus on our mission, Commander Reese." Daelen watched her for a long moment, something settling deep in his chest. He had faced impossible odds before. He had fought battles that should have ended in his death. But never, in all his years, had he faced something quite like this. And he had the distinct feeling that his world was about to change forever. The air inside the conference hall was thick with tension, though not the kind most of the delegates recognized. Vireya sat at the long negotiation table, her posture a study in rigid control. The discussions had been going on for hours, with human and Zev'Quari officials debating trade agreements, military cooperation, and technological exchanges. She had spoken when necessary, given her input with her usual precision, but her focus had been fractured. Across from her sat him, Commander Daelen Reese. Every fiber of her being was aware of his presence, as though her body had attuned itself to him the moment they had touched. The Soulmate sigil on her wrist remained hidden beneath her gauntlet, but she felt it, a steady pulse thrumming beneath her skin. This was wrong. A Zev'Quari warrior bonding with a human? Unthinkable. Her people would never accept it. She could not accept it. And yet, despite every logical argument she constructed in her mind, despite her training, despite her determination to bury this growing unease, her traitorous heart refused to obey. Across the table, Daelen leaned back slightly in his chair, arms crossed. his dark eyes assessing her with that quiet intensity. He had been watching her, not obviously, but enough that she noticed. He knew. Maybe he didn't fully understand what was happening, but he felt it too. A part of her wanted to push him away, to sever whatever fragile thread of connection was forming, before it became unbreakable. But another part, an unfamiliar, dangerous part, was drawn to him. For the first time in her life, she was caught in a battle she didn't know how to win. The first fracture. The meeting finally concluded. The delegates, dispersing into smaller groups to discuss logistics. Vireya made her way toward one of the side corridors, eager for a moment of solitude to reassert her control. She had barely taken 3 steps when she heard his voice. "You're avoiding me." She turned sharply. Daelen stood behind her, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He was calm, but there was something in his gaze, something searching. "I do not avoid," she stated, her tone colder than she intended. His lips quirked in a faint smirk. "Right. Because elite alien warriors don't run from anything, do they?" She stiffened. "You misunderstand the situation, Commander Reese." He tilted his head slightly. "Do I?" Her fingers twitched at her side. Every part of her training told her to walk away, but for some reason, she stayed. After a long pause, she exhaled sharply. "This situation is irrelevant to our mission." His brows lifted. "Situation?" She cursed herself for the slip. Daelen stepped closer, his voice quieter now. "You feel it? Too, don't you?" Vireya's heart pounded. "You do not know what you are speaking of." "I think I do," he countered. "I don't know what it means, but from the second we met, something changed." His gaze flickered to her wrist, as if sensing the sigil hidden beneath her gauntlet. "And I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." She clenched her jaw. "This conversation is over." She turned to leave, but before she could take another step, he spoke again, so softly, yet with such certainty that it stopped her cold. "You're scared." Her entire body went rigid. Slowly, she turned back to face him. Daelen didn't look smug. He didn't look like a man who had won an argument. Instead, he looked at her with something closer to understanding. And that was far more dangerous than anything else. "I am not afraid," she said, though even she could hear the faint strain in her voice. He held her gaze for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Then prove it." She frowned. "What?" "Meet me in the training bay, one-on-one." His lips curled slightly. "Unless you're worried, you'll lose." Vireya narrowed her eyes. "A human challenging a Zev'Quari to combat? You cannot be serious." He shrugged. "We'll see." A mixture of frustration and something far more troubling coiled in her chest. She could have refused. She should have refused. Instead, she found herself saying, "Very well. We fight." The training bay was empty save for the 2 of them. The lights cast long shadows across the sleek flooring, and the hum of energy shields lining the walls provided a soft background noise. Vireya stood in the center, her stance poised, her movements precise, as she stretched her arms. She had fought countless warriors, bested some of the greatest combatants in the Dominion. Facing a human should not have even registered as a challenge, and yet, as Daelen stepped onto the mat, rolling his shoulders, a strange anticipation coiled within her. "Rules?" he asked, flexing his hands. "No lethal strikes. No weapons," she said, rolling her neck. "Beyond that? No restrictions." He smirked. "Sounds fair." She had expected him to hesitate, to show some sign of human fragility. But the moment she moved, he reacted instantly. He was fast, faster than most humans she had observed. He ducked beneath her first strike, his body twisting with practiced ease. He wasn't just a soldier, he was trained. Good. She swept her leg out, aiming for his balance, but he pivoted, countering with a strike toward her ribs. She deflected it, but the impact sent a small jolt through her arm. He was stronger than she had expected. For several minutes they fought, exchanging blows in a dance of speed and precision. He adapted quickly, adjusting to her movements with surprising efficiency. And with each strike, With each near miss, the tension between them grew. They weren't just fighting. They were testing each other. Vireya landed a sharp blow against his shoulder, sending him stumbling back. He exhaled sharply, shaking out his arm. "Not bad," she smirked, her breathing steady. "You are resilient. I will give you that." Daelen met her gaze, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "You're holding back," she stilled. "Excuse me? You're not fighting me the way you would fight another Zev'Quari." His voice was low, measured. "Why?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because the truth was too dangerous to admit. Because she couldn't bring herself to hurt him, not in the way she was trained to. Because every time their bodies collided in combat, a different kind of battle raged beneath her skin. She stepped back, composing herself. "This match is over." Daelen didn't argue. He simply nodded, watching her. "All right." She turned to leave. But before she reached the exit, he spoke again. "This isn't just some random attraction, is it?" She froze. His voice was quieter this time, almost careful. "There's something more, isn't there?" Her pulse pounded in her ears. She could have denied it. She could have walked away. Instead, she turned her head just slightly, meeting his gaze over her shoulder. And for the first time, she allowed herself to speak the truth. This should not be possible. Then, without another word, she left. But deep down, she knew. This was far from over. Vireya barely made it to her quarters before the walls of control she had so carefully built began to crack. She stood in front of the sleek, reflective panel that acted as a mirror, staring at her own reflection. The faint glow of her soulmate, sigil pulsed beneath the edge of her gauntlet, a silent, unrelenting reminder of what she had tried to deny. This was impossible. A Zev'Quari warrior bonded to a human, her people would never accept it. She barely accepted it herself. And yet, no matter how much she tried to force it away, no matter how much she willed it to be some kind of malfunction or anomaly, the truth remained. Daelen Reese was hers. The thought sent a strange, electric thrill through her chest, followed immediately by frustration. She had spent years training to be the best, forging herself into a weapon for the Dominion. Emotions were meant to be controlled, weaknesses eliminated. But what was she supposed to do when the universe itself decided that the one person who could unravel her was the very person she was meant to reject? A sharp chime echoed through the room. Incoming communication. Vireya clenched her fists, schooling, her expression back into a mask of neutrality before she accepted the call. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the stern, imposing figure of High Warlord Vaelthar, the supreme commander of the Zev'Quari military. "Commander Vireya," his deep voice rumbled, his golden eyes sharp. "Report." Vireya straightened. "The negotiations with the humans proceed as expected. Their leaders are cautious but willing to cooperate." Vaelthar nodded slightly. "Good. The Dominion sees potential in this alliance, but make no mistake. Humans are still an untested species. We will not show weakness." His gaze sharpened. "And you, Commander? Have you encountered any difficulties?" A test. The High Warlord knew her well enough to sense when something was amiss. Vireya kept her voice steady, none that would compromise the mission. A pause. Then, Vaelthar leaned slightly forward. "Remember your duty, Vireya. You are Zev'Quari. We do not let personal matters cloud our judgment." She inclined her head. "Of course, Warlord." The hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving her alone once more. The words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. We do not let personal matters cloud our judgment. Then why did her judgment feel more clouded than ever? Daelen leaned against the railing of the observation deck, staring out at the vast, glittering skyline of the human city below. The lights stretched for miles, weaving through the darkness like constellations against the night. And yet, despite the breathtaking view, his thoughts were locked onto her, Vireya. He had spent years fighting wars, leading missions, making impossible decisions. But nothing had ever felt as strange or as consuming as what he had experienced in that training bay. He could still feel the ghost of her strikes, the precision of her movements, the sheer power behind every blow. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, fierce, relentless, untouchable. Except somehow she wasn't. There was something in her eyes, something she was fighting to hide. He had seen it in the way she hesitated, the way she had held back. He didn't understand the full scope of what was happening, but one thing was clear. Vireya was struggling, and he wasn't the kind of man to ignore that. An unexpected encounter. Daelen found her later that evening, standing alone on one of the outdoor terraces. The city lights cast a soft glow against her sapphire blue skin, the wind tugging at the edges of her dark cloak. She didn't turn as he approached, but he knew she had sensed him. "You left pretty fast earlier," he said, keeping his voice even. Silence stretched between them before she finally spoke. "You should not be here," he arched a brow. "I could say the same about you," she exhaled, closing her eyes briefly before turning to face him. In the dim light, her golden eyes seemed almost liquid, reflecting the night sky. "You do not understand what this is," she said quietly. "Then explain it to me." She hesitated. For a long moment, Daelen thought she might walk away again. But instead, she surprised him. She removed her gauntlet. Beneath it, the sigil was fully visible now. A pattern of golden light etched into her skin, shifting like molten metal. It pulsed softly, as if responding to his very presence. Daelen's breath caught. "What is that?" She stared at him for a long time before finally answering. "It is a soulmate indicator." The words settled between them like a thunderclap. He frowned. "Soulmate?" "A Zev'Quari's most sacred bond," she admitted. "It only manifests in the presence of one's fated partner. It is undeniable." Daelen's pulse quickened. "And it reacted to me." She nodded once, slowly. "So what does that mean?" he asked, voice quieter now. "It means," she said, voice tight, "that the universe itself has declared you my mate." Silence. A sharp, electric tension hummed between them, an unspoken truth pressing against the space they shared. Daelen ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "And this is a bad thing because—" She shot him a sharp look. "Because it should not be possible." "Why not?" "Because you are human." The frustration in her voice was evident, but beneath it, he sensed something else. Fear. "Look," he said, stepping closer. "I don't know much about fate or cosmic pairings, but I do know one thing. You're terrified of this." She stiffened. "You can fight it all you want, Vireya. But that doesn't change what's happening." Held her gaze, unwavering. "So the question is, what are you going to do about it?" Her jaw clenched. For the first time, she looked truly lost. And then, before he could react, she reached out. Fast. Decisive. Her fingers curled into the front of his jacket, pulling him down into a kiss. It was fire and electricity, a clash of worlds, a collision of fate. For a moment, Daelen's mind blanked. Then he responded, his hands gripping her waist as he deepened the kiss. She tasted of something foreign, something dangerously addictive, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was falling, not in battle, not in combat, but into something entirely unknown. When they finally pulled apart, her breathing was uneven, her golden eyes flickering with too many emotions to name. "This changes nothing," she whispered. Daelen smirked. "You sure about that?" Her fingers lingered on his chest for a moment before she released him. She took a step back, then another. And then, just like before, she walked away. But this time, Daelen wasn't letting her go that easily. Because whatever this was, whatever the universe had decided for them, he wasn't about to ignore it, and neither, he suspected, was she. Vireya walked away, but the taste of Daelen lingered on her lips. She could still feel the heat of his touch, the way his hands had anchored her, steady and unyielding. It had been a mistake, a dangerous mistake, but one she had made willingly. Her mind screamed at her to bury the moment, to lock it away in the deepest recesses of her thoughts. Yet no matter how hard she tried, the sensation of him refused to fade. She had spent her life believing in control, in discipline, The soulmate sigil on her wrist had shattered that belief in an instant. Now she was at war with herself, and she was losing. The unraveling. The following days were agonizing. She did everything to distance herself from Daelen. She avoided him during meetings, ignored the way his gaze followed her across rooms, refused to acknowledge the magnetic pull that made her pulse quicken whenever he was near. She thought she had succeeded, until the night the attack happened. The humans and Zev'Quari had been working toward a formal alliance, but there were those on both sides who opposed it. Tensions had been growing, whispers of sabotage circulating, and then, without warning, an explosion tore through the negotiation hall. The shockwave sent debris flying, the ground shaking beneath her feet. Instinct took over as Vireya lunged to shield a group of diplomats, her body absorbing the brunt of the impact. The ringing in her ears subsided just in time to hear a familiar voice. "Vireya!" Daelen. She turned to see him sprinting toward her, his expression grim. A fresh wound bled at his temple, but he barely seemed to notice. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "I am fine," she said, shaking off the dust. "The explosion was intentional," he finished grimly. "We need to get out of here now." They didn't have time to argue. The two of them moved in sync, cutting through the chaos as security forces scrambled to regain control. Smoke filled the air, the acrid scent of burning metal thick in her lungs. Then, as they reached the exit, Vireya felt it. A presence. An enemy. She spun just in time to see a shadowed figure emerge from the wreckage, weapon raised. A Zev'Quari traitor. Everything slowed. She reached for her own blade, but the moment stretched too long, the enemy's aim too precise. And then, Daelen moved. Without hesitation, he threw himself in front of her, the energy blast striking him. Full force, Vireya's world fractured. "No!" She caught him before he hit the ground, cradling his body as he gasped, pain tightening his features. The wound seared through his side, dangerously close to vital organs. Her chest clenched with something primal, something unbearable. "You fool," she whispered, pressing a hand against the wound in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. He gritted his teeth, a weak chuckle escaping. "You'd do the same for me." A surge of emotions, rage, fear, something deeper, crashed into her all at once. "Stay with me," she ordered, her voice raw. "You do not get to die." His lips curved into a faint smile. Wasn't planning on it. But he was fading fast. And for the first time in her life, Vireya felt helpless. She carried him herself. Through the burning wreckage, through the chaos, past the stunned onlookers. She didn't care about protocol, about appearances. The only thing that mattered was keeping him alive. When they reached the medical ward, she refused to leave his side. Hours passed in agonizing stillness as the human doctors worked to stabilize him. Every second felt like an eternity. She had faced death 100 times before, had watched comrades fall, had survived battles others hadn't, but this was different. When the doctors finally emerged, telling her he would recover, something inside her cracked open. Relief so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. She entered his room quietly. He lay on the medical bed, his breathing steady but strained. The sight of him, alive, sent a wave of emotion crashing through her. As if sensing her presence, his eyes fluttered open. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice rough. She sank into the chair beside him, her usual composure nowhere to be found. "Of course I am." His gaze softened. "Vireya." She exhaled, sharply, closing her eyes for a brief moment before speaking. "I tried to fight it." Daelen didn't ask what she meant. He knew. She met his gaze, her voice quieter now. "But I cannot ignore what is real." His fingers brushed hers, warm despite his weakness. "Then don't." A long silence stretched between them, charged with something neither of them could deny anymore. Vireya had spent her entire life believing love was a distraction. That, attachments, made warriors weak, and yet, here she was, feeling something stronger than anything she had ever known. Maybe this was fate, maybe it was a choice. But either way, she knew one thing. She wasn't letting him go. Not now. Not ever. To be continued. In the next chapters. Oh, you said, now make story good ending, ChatGPT said. Chapter 5. A love worth fighting for. Daelen's recovery was slow, but he was alive. That was all that mattered to Vireya. She remained by his side, watching over him as he healed. It was an unfamiliar role for her, one of quiet patience rather than relentless action. But she didn't question it. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just following orders or fulfilling duty. She was making a choice. Every moment spent with him felt like the pulling of a thread, unraveling the walls she had so carefully built. And the more they unraveled, the more she realized something terrifyingly simple. She didn't want to fight it anymore. A future worth risking everything. For the days passed in quiet moments, conversations shared in hushed voices, lingering, touches that neither of them acknowledged, but neither pulled away from. But the outside world hadn't stopped turning. The attack had shifted everything. There were whispers of betrayal within the Zev'Quari ranks, factions that still opposed any alliance with humans. Some saw it as weakness, and they saw her as compromised. Vireya was summoned before the High Warlord Vialthar once more. This time she knew what the conversation would be about before he even spoke. "You have changed," Vialthar said, studying her with an unreadable expression. "Your judgment is no longer as clear as it once was." Vireya met his gaze evenly. "I am still loyal to the Dominion, and yet, your soulmate is human." The words were calm, but the weight behind them was immense. "Do you know what that means, Vireya?" She did. It meant her place in the Dominion would never be the same. It meant whispers of doubt, of disloyalty. It meant choosing. For a long moment she remained silent, as if the weight of the decision could crush her. But then, she straightened. "Yes," she said firmly. "I do." Vialthar exhaled slowly, as if he had expected this. "You were one of our finest warriors," he said. "But I see now that your path lies elsewhere." Vireya felt no anger, only understanding. Her path had changed, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She bowed deeply, not as a soldier, but as a warrior bidding farewell to the life she had known. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Daelen was waiting for her when she returned. The moment she stepped into his room, he could see it in her eyes. The finality. The decision made. "You're leaving them," he said softly. She nodded. "Not because I was forced to. Because I chose to." He held her gaze, searching for hesitation, for regret. But there was none. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, Daelen reached for her hand. She let him. "Vireya," he murmured, his voice steady. "If you stay with me, this won't be easy." She smirked, the ghost of her old fire returning. "Since when have I ever chosen the easy path?" His lips curved. "Good point." And then, just like before, she pulled him in. But this time, there was no hesitation, no resistance. The kiss was fierce and unyielding, a declaration, a promise, a beginning. When they finally broke apart, Daelen rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. "So what now?" he asked. She exhaled, her grip tightening. "Now," she said, a slow smile forming, "we forge our own path, together." Epilogue. A warrior's heart. A human's love. Vireya had been trained to believe love was a weakness. But standing beside Daelen, she realized the truth. Love wasn't weakness. It was strength. She was no longer just a warrior of the Zev'Quari, no longer just a commander. She was something new. Something forged in the fire of battle and the warmth of love. And as she stepped into the future, hand in hand with the man fate had chosen for her, she welcomed the unknown. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone, and she never would be again.